Well, welcome everyone. We are at, I think, one of the most beautiful venues here along the Preset at the Haven by Human. Thank you so much, Human, for hosting with us. I'm Nadia Koski. I am working at the Marketeer Group with Stephanie Beach, who is our co-founder. It's already in my head, co-founder, but founder and CEO of the Marketeer Group. And we are so excited to have you here for this discussion today. We are going to be unpacking women in AI and how we can design a safer, smarter future together. And let me just scroll you through a few things here, because I know there's a lot of AI talk here. I don't know. Has anyone heard of this thing called AI? I don't know if you've heard of it. And a quick question, or did you want to do that question when you go off? Yeah. Who here thinks that AI is biased? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're going to start unpacking that and how that works in to what we're building today. So AI spending is literally hitting 2.5 trillion this year. That's a lot of money. So we are going to be talking about this not only as an inclusion problem, but as a business problem. More than 80% of organizations are using generative AI by the end of this year, but yet only 22% of people building it are women. 2 in 3 women report experiencing gender bias in AI products. And 86% of organizations deploying Gen AI today admit they don't have governance in place to mitigate this bias. So we have a lot of conversations and a lot of things to discuss here. And I'm so excited to have all of these brains here on this panel. I will introduce everyone really quickly. Here we have CP McBee, who is North American AI Advertising Director at Microsoft AI. We have Myra Betron, who is the Gender Equality Researcher and faculty at Johns Hopkins and founder of PowHER Data. It's a wonderful community all about gender equity and equality, backed by data. Then we have Dorit Posdorf, who is our commercial advisor. And Dora and I go back. We met and bumped into each other at Mexico and Cologne and immediately clicked and said, "You're coming with me, bro," on a few things. We have Adriana Lopez, who's co-founder and CMO at Ignicio AI. We have Laura Hendricks, who's SVP Global Sales at Human. We have Gina Cavallo, nostra Gina, who is CRO Americas at xpln AI. And welcome, let's kick it off. I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie.
Thanks for
coming, everybody. So, Nadia asked who thought if data was biased, and majority of people raised their hands. How many people feel that their company are doing a good job to remedy that? No hands. So that's why we're all here today. I'm really excited to host this panel with these amazing people. We're doing this a little different. We're not just bringing people on here that are going to agree with each other. Everybody is deep into AI in different points, in different ways. We brought these people together to really bring on maybe a little bit of a debate on some of these questions, but we're going to jump right into it. So, 78% of brands say that AI ethics is a priority, yet 86 deploy Gen AI without governance that mitigate bias. In 3 years, there's been no change. So from your position, what is the single most important point in the industry that is getting wrong about AI and gender right now? Let's go just down the kind of real quick and each person give their brief answer to that.
It all depends on the vigils. So I think it starts with, who's putting inputs in. So I think at the core,
When it comes to the accountability, right? So what you put in is what you get out, but also it's not just an ethics problem, it's really a performance problem, and it's an accountability problem on the other side for all the either marketers in the room or typically work with. And I think a lot about the bias is more of an accountability problem.
I think it's twofold. I think it's a people problem as well as a data problem. So it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out type of scenario. And so we have to make sure we're feeding it what's healthy, what's true.
I think these biases have been with us for so many years, and especially, I think, more than biases, also the blind spots. and now they are institutionalized by AI, and we are not looking into all the corners any longer, and that's really a shame because we are missing big chunks of the population.
Well, I want to acknowledge that I come out from a very outsider perspective to the conversation, not advertising, not tech, but someone that has built systems to address gender inequities in different settings, from healthcare to international institutions. And I would say, think what the industry is getting wrong is thinking that a machine can patch your human dynamics, especially with relation to gender, which is highly variable over culture, and time, and it's rapidly changing now. You know that I love data, so I'm going to point us to one quick data point. Just 4 years ago, about 72% of women, young women, said that they want to get married, and now it's down to 61%, and that was 83% in 1993. So if we're relying on machine to produce images of women at home and banging in the boardroom, we're definitely getting it very wrong.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really grateful to be stepping in for my amazing colleague, Tracy Pylon, and to be here speaking to this incredibly meaningful topic. And yeah, in terms of what we're getting wrong, right? We've been at Cannes a couple days now, and every single panel we're hearing about how quickly agentic commerce is moving in terms of product development and deployment. And we need to, as an industry, we are not moving quickly enough to address gender bias, which we have decades of experience with now, right? We understand that it's the data and the systems underlying it that we need to address. And so we want to make sure that we're not carrying forward this old bias into the new world. And we already have a lot of work to do there, to your point. So I'm looking forward to having a really meaningful conversation about how we rally around that.
Yeah. So we know that AI learns and is trained on bias inputs. How do we stop or correct that bias from being baked into the next generation of agentic AI workflows? What do we think the risk is if we don't fix it within the next 6 months to a year? Gina, do you want to lead that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if we don't fix it in the next year, it'll continue to perpetuate. And I think there is a way to use it, at least from a micro level. I'd explain to, are the briefs or the things that we're putting out there have bias, right? So do we use AI for good? Do we actually look at the tools we have and use it to sort of, sift through what we're putting out there and make sure that everything that we put out there as a business does not have a bias?
How do you think we're making sure of that?
Oh, well, I am not an engineer, so there are much smarter people, at Cannes who could probably figure that out. But in my opinion, I think about, everyone talks about the evils of AI, and there is, but there's also a great way to harness it to make sure that you're using it as a filter.
Or Brianna, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that at some level, there's going to be a level of bias in everything that we do, because as humans, we are biased. And that's what the data is based off of, is our inputs. However, I think that we have to figure out, how do we put governance in place to ensure that, one, we need to test the data that we're putting into these systems. We need to understand, am I giving it the right information? Therefore, it can make the right outcome that I'm trying to drive to. But I think at a whole, we've got to figure out, what are the guardrails that we can put in place. I mean, at Agnetia, we're building that control plane, so that governance layer that really infiltrates, like, how do we have all of these agents that work together, and how do we put the guardrails around them to ensure that they're acting correctly? When I shared that I was speaking on this panel, a good friend of mine from Atlanta, she has been training executives in AI, and she reached out and she said, "It's so amazing you're doing this panel, because even after all of the training I've given my LLMs, like, they still will at times think I'm a man, because I am a founder and all of these different components." And it's so it happens all of the time. So I think it's just so important for us to figure out, how do we influence that and how do we direct that correctly?
Yeah. I also feel like governance has been a big topic, and I feel like we talk about it a lot. See, and I feel like it's losing its luster a little bit, almost like privacy, or
Not sexy.
yeah. Like, do you think that it's going to turn into another buzzword?
Sure, it is. I mean, everything's a new buzzword, but it's not a buzzword. It's an unlock.
Yeah.
It is an unlock, because the bias is not. This is not just like a gender equality problem. This is a product defect, because when you bring in bias to advertising, what you're doing is you're actually decreasing your opportunity for revenue and growth.
Profitability.
Yeah. You want to add to that?
Well, I agree. I think it's, there's a human in all of this, right? And so I agree that I think, like, we're going to talk about this, but like, it's not the algo's wrong or lazy. It's actually the inputs. And if you don't have the right inputs, if you're not testing the right inputs, then actually you're going to have a lack of performance on the other side, right? It's actually one of those things that's a bigger risk is not training the AI in the right way. I was going to add that I think, there's been so many shifts in the industry, and we always say, okay, we're going to do it right this time. We're going to put the right guardrails around, but then there's no equal measurement. Everything doesn't interact together, right? I do believe that we have this opportunity from a control and a governance layer to try and do it differently this time.
Yeah.
Also because we should use the AI to help us decide what that governance should be, right? Like, it's so much easier to think big and to try and figure that out. But I believe that this is the moment that we should be putting the guardrails around it, because they're so much smarter than we are and they move so much faster. And if we're not trying to put some guardrails on that, it's going to continue to move faster. I keep calling it the wild, wild west.
Well, it almost has to be out of band, right? So governance does not need to live where you own those decisions. So if you own the data, then your governance is automatically going to be biased. So you have to have something that's more agnostic, that is vendor neutral in essence, that can provide that feedback that sits at that top layer.
Yeah, I think this moment, the industry, we need to be figuring this out together, right? So the industry needs to say, this is what we expect from our AI. This is what we expect that is not going to continue to train the bias.
I think also brands need to figure it out, right? It becomes a brand safety issue at some point as well.
That's CP.
Yeah, totally agree with everything you all are saying. Really great points. I think there's a couple of important layers, right? From a process perspective, you have training the data. That's where the LLM learns to recognize patterns of bias. And then there's the AI system design itself. And that's where we as platforms are responsible for making sure that the AI isn't bringing that bias into the data, right? And so to everyone's point, you need to make sure that you have humans in loop, specifically to make sure that we're categorizing the biased data in the right way, but also making sure that it isn't bringing that into its actions and its decisions. And if we don't, what we're going to find ourselves in, and we're going to continue to find ourselves in situations where we're alienating women, alienating consumers, and kind of propagating stereotypes that have existed for years in media. And one example I thought of from a commerce perspective is, imagine me and my wife, we set up an agentic assistant at home to help us with our household purchases, right? And it assumes that I do all the handiwork, which I don't. I'm terrible at handiwork, and my wife does most of that at home. And when I do it begrudgingly. If the AI assistant were to assume that, they would alienate us, and we simply wouldn't use it, right? And so, what is needed for that? We do need governance, which I know we're going to talk more about in terms of kind of what's needed at industry level, and then specifically where at Microsoft we're trying our best through the responsible AI framework. And but we also need women at every single level of leadership, in product development, in engineering and design. There's obviously a significant gap there to address as well. But without that, we're not going to succeed, because women are the ones who are going to be able to call out and identify gender bias better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot the industry has, the platforms have. I think it really depends on every single individual and decision taker who has the power to make the daily decisions, what assets to produce, what assets to fund, what to create, what to recreate. Because, yeah, we should have a debate, it was said, and I disagree with human in the loop. I think we have to switch to human in the lead, because this is what I feel we are doing a bit, given it sounds also nice and it is so agentic, that we are giving away a bit of the power we are having, and that really annoys me personally. And so it shouldn't just be the industry or the platforms, it really should us leading and taking that responsible leadership approach in the daily doing with AI.
I agree, and I'm going to say yes, but to several of the points, because it would be easy to say, yes, let's get more up-to-date data, let's put humans in demand, and also make sure that women are involved. But I think we also need to have the expertise of someone that can tell the story of that data that's highly evolving, as I said, right now, because I cited data, women's perspectives, men's perspectives are going in a different direction, and we have to look at how we tell that story to the various segments of the audience. And I would also say that assuming that a woman is also not biased is also a mistake, because we are marinating in the same sort of biased images in media, and so a lot of times women also don't get it right.
So brand and retail media are still running on audience models that default to gender stereotypes or mistargeted audiences. And every campaign that funds them compounds the problem. Meanwhile, the brands that have female targeting right become category leaders. Why do you think that is? And what do you think is really that they're doing right? And what do you think that they could do better? Laura, do you want to lead?
So, I don't know if it's just, I guess, about women. I think it's about having the right inputs, right? And like thinking specifically for the brand, what are they trying to accomplish? So it's no different than what do I want out of this? And then what are the things, if I'm talking to that person, what are the, I want that person to buy this product, how do I identify what inputs need to be in that? So it's no different if you're talking to a man, right? And so it comes back to what's the goal and what are the steps I'm going to take? It used to be what are the audiences and then what's the media and in the right content. Now, if you're using AI, it's just looking at the right things. It really comes back to the core concepts of it. I think we're trying to say, great, you can say, just put it in and assume the model knows what to do, but you really need to think about what is it that you're putting in and what's the goal. And so the input, and do you trust the input? Do you trust the data you're using into it, right? So we think a lot at Human about trust both in the signals that are in the ecosystem that are feeding into the impressions, but I think trust is the metric that everything has to be built on. So even, do you trust the data you're using for the inputs of how that brand is getting to that female or that male? And so it really comes back to, I think, do you trust that signal quality and data? Or are you working with the people that you can, trust where they're bringing that data from?
But trust isn't a media KPI.
It should be.
It isn't.
Yes, no, I think trust is, especially in this day and age, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about bias. So if you don't trust either the signal that's coming into your impression, or you don't trust, we're not even talking about bots, right? Like, we're not even talking about the LMs, the agents, the bots, but that all the different personas. But if you don't trust it, then you're going to have inflated marketing, you're going to have inflated performance, and it's really a profitability issue.
Yeah, I'm not saying you are wrong.
No,
I'm just saying, I'm just saying in the reality of operationalizing, yes, brand safety is something you can contextually cover in your media buying. Trust is not a signal. It's not a media KPI.
It should be. Yeah. We're talking a lot about that with our clients of, especially as, I keep calling it the wild, wild west. As the wild, it's changing and the models are moving faster than us. Do you trust the current providers of brand safety who are working on static models that are not training on 30 trillion data points a week? I don't know, right? Like it is such a signal driven, and, at Human, we see signals all the way into the deep dark web. So if you're using the intent of those signals into those models, that's the foundation of trust. And to me, it's about the signal and the trust you have in where that signal is coming from and how deeply you can see that across the internet. Because for a long time, we haven't had that, right? But if we're going to rewrite the governance and rewrite the structure, you need to rewrite the media KPIs or where you're starting from. Otherwise, everything that you're showing of who you drove to site, how many sales you have, it could be very inflated.
Yeah, when I hear the word trust these days as it relates to AI systems, I hear it mainly about discoverability, right? Like, how is it that you're showing up? How often? If you have a lot of citations, that means the AI trusts you. But yeah, we don't. It is, I think, important as an industry. How is it that we are building towards signals that indicate whether or not we should be trusted from a bias perspective, right? We have a lot of really great emerging tools out there. I'll call out Microsoft Clarity, which is one that we're really proud of, and we're building a lot of AI transparency around. And that should be one for discussion, is like, how is it that we're thinking about those kind of signals so that we can make sure that you are, building out your discoverability, but doing it in a safe way that is mitigating for bias as much as it possibly can.
So less than 3% of executives would knowingly deploy a bias tool, and yet brands' reputation's still the number one risk for biased Gen AI. What does it take to build trust, as we're talking about trust, with AI while also ensuring safe engagement is the real metric? While maybe these aren't real metrics that we're able to actually measure and report out on, they are very important. So it is something that we need to consider, look at, and maybe learn to write into the script. Myra, what do you say to that? What are your thoughts on that?
I appreciate the framing of the question in terms of safety, because I actually do come from a public health background. And the first principle of public health is do no harm. And you do that by setting up the safeguards from the point of design, not auditing your way out afterwards, right? By then it's too late if your content is released. And I'm going to use an example from the biomedical field as a way to better understand this. So it wasn't until 1993 in the United States that Congress passed a law that would require companies to actually test their products on women or include women in clinical trials. And what that meant and has meant is that actually women are twice as likely to experience adverse events from a range of drugs. Ambien is probably the example you might have heard of more commonly. And I can cite many examples. For example, during COVID, the personal protective equipment was not designed properly for women's bodies, and women make up 70% of the health workforce, so it wasn't actually protecting women. And so approving a piece of content or media without running the bias check is like approving a drug without assessing its actual impact on women. Maybe it's effective overall, but not really understanding the safety of impact on women. And one might say that, well, medicine, actual health products has a physical impact, and that's not the same as advertising. But we know that AI has caused people to do some very harmful things to themselves, to other people. But also, I would say that AI is really the cultural engine of our time. Media is the cultural engine of our time. We should let AI take that power away from the media. In fact, I would say that the media is the reason or not that we can have such laws in place to protect women, because it really shapes people's minds and these decisions.
I would just say, I think we have to stop thinking about governance as breaks and start thinking of it as an unlock. So whenever you want to scale a media, you're not scaling just one piece of creative. That's scaling, millions of times. And so the harm that it can do, or the disconnect that it has, is amplified really quickly. However, when you do it correctly and you do have those guardrails and governance in place, I think the positive scale is the flip side of that. So instead of it being like the brakes, it's actually the steering, and it's going to point us in the right direction. And I would just add that this type of governance and this bias that we're talking about goes way beyond just gender, right? We've got cultural biases, we've got racial biases, and things that we have to take into consideration as well that really is impactful, especially in the media space.
I just think as leaders, because if we're here at Cannes, we obviously we're leaders in this space. It is such a privilege to be here. And it starts with us to make sure that if we're designing or we're part of larger organizations, like I'm building a team now in the US, I'm building a team coming from a different culture, from the French culture. But it's up to us to make sure that we educate ourselves and have the proper guardrails in place, culturally, and then from a technological perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I'd add to those great points is that for anyone else who needs an additional reason, one of the biggest signals that we get when it comes to these early ads that we're seeing in AI is that people expect personalized experiences about the things that they care about. And people care a lot about their gender identity. So if you are not getting that right through the underlying design of the AI systems and data, and you're passing through advertisements that speak to gender in the wrong way, let alone an offensive way, you're going to have consumers who quickly disengage rather than lean in. And that's going to be a lot harder to hide in this next generation of ads, which are meant to be so hyper-personalized.
I was even thinking, though, with the statistic you mentioned about women not getting married as quickly, or or wanting to marry. I mean, I'm so ahead of the trend. Um, listen, I've been on brand for so long, since '82. But was thinking about when you're talking about also retail media, and it's like also the consumer is going to change. The person who has the power, the purchasing power, will change if those dynamics change. So we can't actually have biases, right? Because the nuclear family, the chosen family, all that stuff is going to evolve in the next generation. So as a brand marketer, which I'm not, but I would think, logically speaking, there's an entire TAM that you're missing out on, right? So I think it's also a very expensive mistake for brands and marketers not to get right.
Well, I think there needs to be, somebody mentioned transparency earlier, and I believe that we need to have some level of transparency on the data that's been put into these models, right? And so a lot of times we just trust the data implicitly, but it's actually like we need, as you know, for example, as a governance layer, I need to provide feedback to those data partners to say like, hey, this is where you're doing really well and here's areas that need improvement. I think that's really important. The other part is, you mentioned, CP, like, okay, I don't do the handiwork. Well, understanding the outcome and actually knowing your audience is so important. And you can't do that without data. You can't do that without kind of running that informational inputs before you start to reach out on your campaigns and your media planning and all of those things. So therefore, I would say we really have to look at one thing that AI does really well is at scale, it can tell us a lot about what's happening there really quickly. It can provide those insights and give us that information. And so when you find out, hey, the woman's actually shopping or the woman's actually booking the doctor's appointments, but it's actually for her husband, it's actually for her father, like you understand who you're actually speaking with. But we're not doing that yet. We're just like, hey, I want to reach this audience. This is who I'm going after. The order is so out of whack. So we've got to reset the order as much as we reset the rules around it.
I agree. And I think like personalization was something that was supposed to remedy that. And I feel like we just continuously try to capture that in different ways and redefine it almost. And we're never actually getting it right. Because like you said, we're just trusting the data and just putting it in there and not necessarily identifying who we're actually speaking with.
And it gets a bit more abstract every other day, because if you are now running, for example, ads at Meta or Google, I mean, in the past you had very narrow choices to determine your audience. You had selection criteria. Then it was going to be broader, broader targeting, broader audiences. Nowadays, you just say what your goal is. Right? So also what we are saying, that we are actually selecting audiences, even that is not true anymore. And I think this is where it completely starts becoming a black box, because it's not that from really a media buying and operational everyday doing, I'm not even selecting the audiences anymore. I partially don't get any performance reports on who was targeted, who saw it, who reacted it. So I can only implicitly derive that from those who actually ultimately did the purchase in my shop.
Right.
And I think this really, AI is the one thing, but the degree of automation and the degree of so to say, the platforms taking over the whole process is making things even more difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I agree. Only 9% of organizations running Gen AI have governance that catches bias in women that are better at spotting it than men. How do we set up a successful AI policy, both internal and external governance, where that fits in the chain of AI deployment, and what is still missing from the process? CP, do you want to lead that?
Yeah, I'll start with this one. Thank you. And I agree with everyone. We need more of a industry kind of wide perspective, emotions and work in terms of how it is that we manage this collectively. From a Microsoft perspective, we have the responsible AI framework. We've had that in place for 10 years with inclusiveness and fairness as core principles. I've seen it work in person where we've had conversations around product. Product is moving fast. Engineering conversations are moving fast, and they've had to kind of pump the brakes to make sure that we're going through the responsible AI, workflows to nail things before we go to market. We have kind of 4 pillars to the responsible AI framework. It's govern, map, measure, and manage. It is end-to-end, so it is not just up to deployment, it is after deployment. We also work very closely with communities that we set up online through our sites, also give people the ability to kind of give feedback directly within the products. The other thing that I'd say is important about how responsible AI is set up organizationally is that they report to no sales teams, so no sales leaders or products leaders. They are only responsible for driving against our responsible AI goals. So there's certainly no perfect in this space. I think that's what we're here to discuss, and I'm not asserting that we're anywhere near perfect. We're continuing to learn and grow. However, we do have a very robust framework that we've iterated on for the past 10 years. And I think that's going to be more and more important, especially as we're in this transition period where AI is moving from just kind of generating content and answering questions and moving quicker towards taking actions on our behalf. To Dorit's point, like that becomes more the black box, and you really need a very robust governance framework to make sure that you're managing that.
Yeah, from an Agnitio, my company's standpoint, I would say we've put in place agents and workflows that do things like compliance and brand safety. And also it's like harnessing that specifically for your organization. So that's, I think, and as we think about the industry, the media and advertising industry, that's specifically what we're doing about that. And we also have the ability to create hierarchy around data sets, right? So what data set do you trust the most? When do you not trust it? So putting all of those inferences in place, I think, is super important. But I would say in the bigger scheme of things, as all of us are engaging with LLMs, I think it's up to us as individuals to surface whenever there are biases, to share those out, because it actually holds those LLMs and what people are mostly building on accountable.
Just to bring it back, because I think, you said something interesting about the just, what's happening in that data stream and coming into it. And I think a lot of it is also about, as people start to activate their agents to do something, right? This is where it comes back to brands and retail media networks and also to the brands that are actually targeting in the right way. I think they are quickly going to be outdated if they're not looking at the intent of what I'm calling the 4 different, personas that are in the digital internet now. So we're talking to a lot of retail media networks who are like, okay, so it used to be bot or not, right? And you used to have a relationship with your humans, and you as, let's say, Walmart Connect, you're trying to always create a relationship with your humans and with your customers. But if 52% of the internet is non-human now, what are you doing about that, right? So really understanding the intent of what the 4 different personas are, right? The LLMs, the agents that are acting on our behalf, your bad traffic, and then your humans, and they all need a different experience on your site, right? So as a brand, if I am planning a trip and I'm Marriott and I'm planning a trip for my family of 5 to Japan, if I'm going and looking at Marriott and searching and I'm saying I need 2 rooms and I want to be this and I want that, I should be on all of the, I need that emotional experience, right? I need all the pictures, I need all this, right? But if I'm sending my agent there, they just need to go and scrape down that I have 5 families, this and that, I want to pull, those things. And so it also for brands and becomes everyone's trying to figure out as brands how to have an AI strategy, how to redevelop their content and their architect their site. And it really comes down to visibility, right? So who's actually coming to your site? What was the intent of that LLM? What was the intent of that agent? And what was the intent of the human? Where did they come from? And how do you want to react to them? Because it also comes down to so much is coming, ad load. So I only need the LLM to scrape 3 pages. So let's control that. I need the human to go to these pages. So I think a lot of having better relationships for brands to be successful, like you talked about, really comes down to that deep signal. And can you start to use the intent of what's coming and interacting with you as a brand to drive your models?
Well, I'm going to take this from the gender equity inclusive systems angle, which is what I know. I think right now it's the wild, wild west in terms of international, national governance looking at this. And unfortunately, not a lot, very few are actually specifically including measures around inclusiveness and equity. And I would say almost no. I think the EU has passed something around gender very recently, which is positive. But I think back to a different era in the late 1990s when I was in university and globalization was coming to the fore. the same panic was happening around what is this going to do to jobs? How do we mitigate risks around this? And unfortunately, it took until 2017 to actually set up a specific task force and lens of looking at how this was impacting women versus men. And we don't have 20 plus years to wait with AI. We know that, right? So I would hope that companies, and it's good to hear Microsoft has its governance systems in place for the past 10 years, but I would hope that companies would be proactive in actually trying to also address this inclusiveness, equity, and bias angle. And from the work that I've done integrating into systems, I think there are 3 key things that need to be in place. First, actually assigning specific roles and responsibilities for someone doing that, because something like gender or equity is something that's usually considered cross-cutting in everyone's job, and what becomes everyone's job quickly becomes nobody's job. I've been in that role many times, and so that's definitely a pain I've felt. Second, making sure that the people in place actually have capacity. Again, going back to the point of, we're just going to assign a woman to this role to kind of give it that lens. That doesn't
check the
mean
box.
the job it will be done properly, right? And that you can just check the box. And I would say elevate it to sort of the security level review, right? Because otherwise there isn't the same accountability or seriousness put behind it. Those are the 3 things that I would recommend.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that while it's an old topic, it's still a new topic. And I feel like we're just scraping the surface. I'm very interested to see how this evolves. And that's why we put this panel together, and we plan on kind of continuing it onward. So women's jobs are more exposed to Gen AI in 88% of countries studied. 69% of women leaders report cuts to entry-level hiring, as AI supposedly absorbs their jobs. The next 18 months decide whether AI becomes productivity engine or a filter of who advances and who doesn't. I feel like there's so much happening, there's so much data, and this is something that is going at the speed of light. Right? Like you said, we don't have 20 years. I was at an event where the keynote was going over some things, and I think it took like Amazon 18 years to make $1 billion. It took like Facebook 7 years or something like that. AI took 3 years. 3 years, right? So like if we don't get it right, if we don't back up and we're like, what are we doing? We're gonna lose the moment of truth, and it's gonna be harder than ever. So I would love to go down the panel, or whoever wants to start can start. Name one uncomfortable truth about AI right now that the industry is not ready to say out loud.
I hope we don't lose the ability to use our brains. Want me to expand on that?
If you like.
Oh yeah. Oh no, for sure. Yeah, no, because I think AI is fantastic. I'm a sales leader. I tell my team, we got a call with General Motors, drop the earnings report in there, get the most salient points, be educated before you get into that meeting. It gives you your time back. And salespeople don't have, we don't have as much time. We have to know, we're doing 20 pitches a week sometimes, and that's a lot of prep work. So I think it makes you efficient in so many other ways. But the art of writing a really nice email, right? And it can check your work, or how to communicate and build a relationship. Like, these are things that I'm worried about. And as someone who's hiring and building sales teams, I do need some of the entry level folks, right? I need all levels to create a successful team. And I'm concerned about what is the training, what does it look like coming up if they're not actually getting those hard skills or soft skills.
I'll go next, actually, because I was going to say I worry about the in real life component, right? So especially, I'm a mom of 3, and so I do worry about just as they're coming up with the phones and this and that, and now we're putting AI into the mix. Like, they barely even talk to each other when they're all socializing, right? Like, what is this going to do to that? So just to put kind of the mom lens on it, I do worry about that, but more so also of, we were having this conversation last night, COVID has, I love the flexibility of you don't have to be in the office and people can be remote and you can have that hybrid, but I do worry. I think that's very hard as you're coming out of college and you're getting into the workforce. I learned so much just observing and just being there and listening and being in the moment and observing from leaders and hearing what they said and taking that into and we're missing that in the workforce. And so I just get worried about, while AI, especially as a sales leader, it's amazing, right? It helps so many things and it makes me so much more productive. I don't want to lose that in real life component with colleagues, with partners, with brands and with my children as they start to continue to have this new thing that just fills their brain faster than I think they're ready for.
I think the uncomfortable truth is that AI is going to take away jobs. But I think the flip side of that is that there's going to be new roles that are opening up. And I don't know that we can get this right, but I think we can get it better. And so better to me means that we use AI to stop being bricklayers and paper pushers, but we become creative strategists and connectors. So I think if we can do that correctly, we're going to unlock some new roles, right? So it could be somebody that is over AI bias, right? And they're checking through those systems, and that's kind of what their sole focus is. It could be they're no longer maybe analytics and insights people, but maybe they're making sure that the insights and analytics are based on true and strong signals that are reliable.
I would add a completely different, uncomfortable truth. I wonder sometimes whether we are honestly asking ourselves, A, the question, what happens if somebody pulls the plug? And the second question is, do we actually have the power to power all this? Or will we just not create the biggest break in society ever? Because currently what we are powering is, I think, 1 or 2 or 3% of world's population. So we are currently excluding not only half of it, but actually really everybody besides a very, very small minority. And I sometimes wonder whether this minority also has the emotional maturity to make the best out of it. Yeah, so uncomfortable truth. So let's see who wins the power play.
That was a good one. Yeah, talk about inequality. I would say, from my perspective, the most uncomfortable truth related to this conversation is that it's not going to be a quick technological fix, which we're used to now with AI, to really get the story of human dynamics and gender dynamics right. And we need to recognize that it took centuries and millennia to shape our gender inequalities in culture. So we actually need to take the time to reshape it with humans.
Yeah. I'll add to Brianna's point. Brianna's point about the future of the workforce, right? None of us know exactly what the future of the workforce is going to look like. I am an example of a person in a newly formed AI role, and we know that there's going to be a balance of that, displacement, new roles. And obviously I want to have a positive legacy. It's something that I think about a lot as it relates to the future, my 8-year-old son, and what does it look like when AI is making decisions for us, when intelligence in a way, and it certainly in some roles becomes a commodity. How is it that you use that? I think our chief legal officer, Brad Smith, just did an article around, he went back to his alma mater, Princeton, and got some hard feedback from the people in the audience about where things are going. And that's, all information that's really important to us and to me personally in terms of the role that I can play shaping things going forward.
Yeah, I also think one thing to think about too is education. I feel like we kind of take for granted that we're in this space and we know it, but but I do feel as though that's really something that is lacking as well, especially looking at it from a parent lens. I see how my 13-year-old daughter is using AI or what her school is teaching about it. And it's scary. I'm like, you can't just put something in and expect that's what's coming out. And these younger generations, I feel like we said, they're losing, some of that critical thinking and some of that, I don't know,
Emotional regulation skills.
Yeah, they don't have the emotional regulation skills for any of it, for
And that's
social,
who's gonna
for
be
any of the
next
things that are
in
coming
this
into their
environment,
brain.
though. That's
Yes,
who's
that's
bringing
right.
up into
Yep.
doing this. And so that's scary.
We're
in itself.
asking too much of them at the ages that they are to be able to interact with what, most of us as adults find it overwhelming. And these kids who are not, emotionally there, They don't have the resilience. They don't have the ability. And there's so much that's coming into their input. And this is just that next level and layer that I think we have to be careful.
Parental governance is really
Well,
allowed.
I mean, I feel like it's
Really.
more important than ever because that is going to be our next generation of the workforce. And if the bias is there and the lack of critical thinking is there, that's a recipe for disaster. So you're back. You're back in the office on Monday. What is one thing you will implement now with your team to employ a more inclusive AI practice or workflows in the second half of the year? Do you want to start that end?
Sure. I mean, this is the most important one, right? What is it that we're gonna do now?
Do about it.
Yeah, and I thought of a few things that I would welcome, please, the team to hold me accountable on here. The first is in my own work every day. Every day I'm talking about AI, I'm working on AI, I'm using AI about my AI work, and I'm gonna hold myself to making sure that I am detecting where there is gender bias more frequently, calling that out. That's number one. Two, I work in a couple of different industry organizations, AdColor, as well as the IAB. And these are conversations that needs to be built in. I know that they're already happening, but I think adding the context around AI, to your point, it's so complex and when you get to the data and system layer, making sure that we're talking about it at that level. And then the last thing is making sure that I stay in touch with the amazing fellow panelists so that we can continue to work towards this together.
Well, I'm a solopreneur, but I do have a social media platform, which is actually how Nadia found me, of over 200,000 followers that I use to challenge gender bias. And so I'm going to continue to do that and flip the script and also take back what I'm learning here to share that to have more informed consumers to demand inequality or equality.
We already started doing it, but I think more intensively will be no harm is basically auditing our own thinking. And I think that is really something to step out of your comfort zone and to acknowledge you just simply don't know it all and you don't get the data and to try to reconstruct. As I said, we don't know anything about the targeted audience anymore. We don't get any signals or any feedback of all the groups we haven't reached with our commercials. But to have hypotheses who potentially could be out there in this world as target group and then to, look at whom we actually have and whom we wanted to be and then questioning ourselves why it is not working. I think this constant repetitive questioning of your own work, your own creative work, the way you spend your media bucks, I think that is something just needs to become a weekly habit.
So as I mentioned, we have compliance and brand safety agents, but I've been spending a little bit of time as I'm listening to all of you talk to say, like, what other agents do we need? What do we need to maybe identify areas or gaps that we have? So that's one thing I'd like to start implementing on Monday. I am not technical, but my amazing co-founder and CTO has set us up now. I can vibe code, and I've actually contributed to the product. It's so fun. It's like, I did that. And so I'm excited to figure out what can we start with? What kind of conceptual things can we start with? And then the other part is that, it's so great to be a part of this industry. We have a lot of really smart people here. And I would say we mostly have really good people here as well that want what's best for the greater humanity. And so thinking about asking you, Meyer, how can I incorporate this? What are some smart ways that I can take this back? Because it doesn't just impact internal in our work as we are as a company, but it also impacts externally in the brands and the publishers and the agencies and the data platforms that use our products. So.
Well, definitely connection. I think Cannes is always just such an amazing week around connection, relationships, and just having conversations that you wouldn't have. And then the work is carrying that on beyond here. So definitely connection beyond here. But in the world of transparency, I was prepping for this week and I had all of my team, my lead global sales, do their briefs for me. And as I was on the plane over and I was reading them all, I had lots of questions back because you could tell some had really done the evaluation of the AI they had used and put their own thoughts into it, and some had not, right? And so my first thing is to go back and say, AI is a tool, but that doesn't replace this, and it doesn't replace the knowledge of what you've done in real life with those customers, right? So I think there is that balance of holding them accountable, but use the AI, but you can't forget to use exactly what we're doing here in the relationships and bring in what you've actually done. So that'll be on the next all hands conversation.
I had a different answer, but I actually CP made me think because Ad Color is a wonderful organization, and there are other organizations that I love, like the Ad Council and the GLAD, and with Explain, we have a way to actually measure creative attention, so that the media plan can connect with Be Creative, and and we're using attention as that signal. And I was thinking yesterday, because I was on another panel yesterday about identity and AI. How do we use what we've built for the good? How do we take what we've built and then, because some of the most rewarding work I've done is with the Ad Council, some of these amazing organizations. And how do you use what you have at your disposal to then superpower a purpose?
Do you think there's a way that we create something that actually calls out gender bias, that's shared, that's transparently open in the industry?
Yeah, or something that brings more attention, since we do to the right, bring the right message to the right people in the right time. And so I don't know. I'm again not technical either. I like the big ideas, and then I'm like, here, can someone do this? I could sell it. I'm with you. Yeah, but that's what I think. I always think there's a great way to take everything that we have at our disposal and actually put it towards purpose-driven work as well, not just driving revenue.
Totally. And one specific thing I thought of as we were just speaking here is, not all, but most of these organizations are set up to recognize and reward people for great work, industry-leading work. And we talked today about how it's the underlying data and systems that we need to be addressing. That's not quite as sexy as we've talked about to put people on it, but it's the thing that we should be putting on the main stage, and we should be recognizing and rewarding those big thinkers who are addressing the right things that are going to have exponential effect in terms of how media works in the coming years. So that's another thing I think for us to think about as we go back and engage with these industry organizations.
Challenge the status quo, right? Like do it together, work with other people, and really think differently.
And then you have more people in your circle doing these panels, right? I always say I have my board of directors, my girlfriends that I rely on for decisions, but then you meet amazing people at Cannes that you could call and say, oh my God, I know you're an expert. We already connected about it. I'm like, I don't know about this. Please help. Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of Cannes. You meet all these amazing people who have different expertise.
Different perspectives. Well, thank you so much for being here, guys. This was a great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate it. And thank you again, Human, for this beautiful space.
So we give us
Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. Sure. Of course you do.
I was listening to this. I'm David, by the way. Hello, everyone. Hello. I'll stand over here so I'm not by everyone's back. I'll put the mic right up to the speaker and see if we get some feedback. When I was leading TrustX, we were having almost exactly this conversation, but the topic wasn't gender, it was multicultural audiences and the biases that are built into audience data, targeting, and all the performance that happens in programmatic media. It almost feels like what's old is what's new again. The multicultural problem, I don't think has ever really been solved in programmatic media because the audience data is just lacks enough depth on narrower slices. In gender, it's not quite as dramatic because women are representative of about half the population. But in the AI conversation, I found what's very interesting about what you guys were talking about is that the training data is probably more focused on male behavioral elements. Do you see that same parallel that we've talked about here on stage about women and men having a more dramatic impact on smaller slice audiences like Hispanics or other cultures within a country that are a much more narrow minority?
I think there's a massive impact. It's all. Oh, okay, no. I think there's a massive impact, right? I think what Myra mentioned about the healthcare specifically, right? So what kind of testing has been done for male and female? I would even use that same example for what's been tested across different cultures, different races. For example, we know Black women are much more likely to suffer traumatic pregnancies and deliveries, right? Are we considering that type of data? Are we considering that, you know, it goes way beyond media here. So I think that that impact is massive. Yes. And I think it's even, like you mentioned, it's probably harder because it is so many slices and dices, but we have to do better.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your can.